everybody. Welcome back to another episode of Bedtime Stories, where we are still reading. Whoops. Silly green screen. Look Out for the Little Guy by Ant-Man, aka Scott Lang, but actually written by Rob Kuttner. Fantastic book so far. Chapter 15. We'll be finishing it tomorrow evening. And then tomorrow evening, I do have an announcement that we will be flipping a coin to decide what the new book will be. It is down to two sci-fi novels. Thank you all who voted in the poll in the Discord. And so I will reveal those at the end of this stream, and then tomorrow we will flip for them. How's that sound? I think that sounds like a wonderful idea. And now let's get ready to get tucked in, get a hot beverage, and make sure that you're all snug and ready for Chapter 15 of Look Out for the Little Guy, called Ant on the Wall. It's ironic. As a kid and a teenager, I was so socially awkward. I would have killed for the power to shrink myself down to the point of invisibility. And yet, now that I'm an adult, I'm actually pretty decent at fitting into almost any social situation. How did I become this charismatic, you might ask? This power doesn't have an exciting origin story. I wasn't injected with an experimental cool guy serum. Just ask my daughter. Instead, before I became able to fit in between molecules, I learned how to fit into groups of people who were already doing their thing way before I showed up. And that's good because over the last 10 years or so, I've had to do a lot of infitting to a gang of, let's say, fist-forward fellow inmates, to a semi-awkward post-divorce blended family situation with Maggie and Paxton, and, of course, to the Avengers & Co. That last one probably wasn't helped by the fact that I first met some of them by trying to fight them. Very hard to overlook a first impression when it's been made in your face. So how did I learn to be the human puzzle piece that always fits? The good news is that while it's always a challenge, it's also totally doable for anyone. And so I thought I'd share some pro tips. If this were a book, well, I mean, besides the one it already is, it wouldn't be so much how to win friends and influence people as how to not have people reject you and maybe one day consider you a friend or at least not a total creeper. Okay, that title could stand to have a red shrink disc curled at it. Absolutely. Shall we get on with the tips? Yes. Don't speak. I know just what you're saying, so please stop explaining. Don't tell me 'cause it hurts. No, don't speak. It says right there, don't speak. I mean, at least at first don't speak. And what I really mean is don't enter a new group shooting your yapper off. I made that mistake in college. I knew my science-focused campus was full of smart people, but in my impetuous, cocky freshman year, I also secretly believed I was one of the really smart ones. And some insecure part of me worried that if I didn't lay down that big brain on campus marker ASAP, someone else would take the title. But unsurprisingly, my peacock-like displays of fun facts led to social isolation, even by my uber-nerdy school's standards. So eventually I started to evolve. When I entered a new situation, I would say my name, then nice to meet you, and that's it. At first, it was a revolutionary new technique, to me, called listening to what they had to say first before shooting my mouth off. I know, be a good listener. It sounds obvious when I put it down on paper. It's just that when you do actually know a lot of stuff, or let's say have a lot of stuff that's just dying to be shared, it can be extremely tempting to just let the old fire hose spurt. Don't I know it? But here's the real secret. Every group develops a subculture all its own, becomes its own mini society, and if you're a late arrival, you enter speaking a different language. You need to give yourself the time to learn the new group's tongue, their pace, their sense of humor, and what they value most and least. So hang back, give your jaws a rest, and soon enough your brain will automatically migrate to your new team's wavelength. And that's an actual fun fact. While number 2, stop trying. While we're still talking brain stuff, it turns out we humans, along with many other species, have this built in tendency called mirroring that puts others at ease. When someone smiles, you smile back. When someone relaxes into their chair, you follow suit. When someone vomits, well, maybe it's time to leave that tailgate party. But we also have a tendency to take it too far. Sometimes we try to completely replicate what others do in order to prove that we're cut from the same cloth on the same team. Or to use the technical term, we suck up. Boy, did I learn that the hard way when I first started working with the Avengers. Turns out Clint doesn't want to be repeatedly invited to go out shooting. Thor is never going to be impressed with how much Norwegian you learn online. No matter how many times you pick the right card, Wanda Maximoff is never going to believe you know magic. And let's be clear, you don't have to go to the other extreme either. By all means, show an interest and ask tons of questions about your new coworker's obsession with painting tiny figurines. That's the listen, follow up to the shut up point above. But you don't have to show up unannounced at his house on a Saturday morning with a horsehair brush and a tiny overpriced dragon figure ready for a metallic finish. Yeesh. Sounds desperate. Number 3, be the guy or gal. How high would you raise your eyebrows if I told you that at its heart, prison is a place of kindness? What I mean is, it's such a harsh, unforgiving humanity stripped down to its essential institution that a few kind deeds are worth a lot there. The cliche from movies and TV shows is that surviving prison is all about asserting your dominance. Even though you may be an electrical engineer, you're supposed to somehow mosey up to the biggest bruiser there and somehow clean the yard with his face. Well, I knew that was never going to fly, that much more likely yard cleaning would be with mine. So I tried a slightly different approach. I would find the toughest guys and ask them when their birthdays were. Ridiculous, right? It certainly wasn't what they were expecting, but as I explained, I knew how hard it was to keep track of time in prison. So if they told me their birth dates, I'd make sure to sing happy birthday to them. What on earth was I thinking? Simply that everyone, even the most menacing looking 7-foot tall stack of muscles, wants to be treated as a full human being. And if you can find a path into that humanity, you can connect with anyone. Beyond the birthday stuff, and man, by the end I was singing that song more often than an overworked family-style restaurant waiter, I was the guy. The guy who helped you pick up the pile of metal plates you accidentally knocked off the workbench in the shop. The guy who noticed you in the corner trying to keep down tears because you missed your little girl. Actually, sometimes I was also that guy in the corner. The point is, when everyone around you is fighting and stealing, I was the guy who was going the opposite route. That more than anything got me through all 3 years among the granddaddy of tough crowds. And I've got the still unbroken septum and annual birthday cards from those bruisers to prove it. Number 4, but don't be that guy or gal. The downside of this is it can be a very slippery slope going from being the person who does something for everyone to the one who needs something from everyone. And right after I got released, I was pretty much a human pool of need. On top of the creature comforts and freedoms I'd been denied for years, I was just starving for human companionship. So I kept bugging Maggie about seeing Cassie even when she told me repeatedly, not yet. Finally, I couldn't stand it any longer and just showed up as an unwanted surprise at Cassie's birthday party. Paxton may have been the police officer there, but it was Maggie who read me the riot act. She told me my daughter needed a dad who was stable, supportive, and on the right path in life. Not whatever it was I was then. And that I could not see Cassie until I'd made some solid progress in that department. Wow, that got me. I guess I'd always seen myself as all those good things, deep inside my own understanding of life. But from the outside, I started to see how Cassie might perceive me, especially if I started gravitating towards Lewis & Co.'s criminal plans and ended up in jail again. So that hurt. Badly. There are few things in life more devastating than suddenly noticing the huge gap between how you see yourself versus how others do. But it was a solid wake-up call from Maggie and made me appreciate how hard she was working to protect our daughter, a plan I can 100% get behind. So I adjusted my thinking. I learned to stop seeing Maggie and Cassie as others as Scott fulfillers, and reminded myself that they had their own lives and needs. And if it was on me to prove myself worthy of fitting in with where they were, not the other way around. The good news is, once I found my new path, or at least Hank put me on it, I actually ended up spending a lot more time with Cassie, Maggie, and even Paxton than I'd ever thought possible. Which brings me to my last tip. Time is on your side. I mean, not biologically, of course, but when it comes to becoming one of the gang, sometimes you need to hit the pause button and let time work its magic. After our little tarmac tea party in Germany, I was ant persona non grata for many of the Avengers and friends, specifically the ones I'd fought. It felt like if I was lucky, one day they might choose to not crush me in one of their incredibly powerful hands. But then, after my imprisonment, plea deal, and re-imprisonment in my home, I suddenly had way too much time on my hands, and time became my ally for creating allies. As you now know, I spent a lot of that time sending out emails and texts, sometimes just simple messages like, how's it going? And then in my buy now signature move, happy birthday! That's the real irony here in all this. We've all been taught since birth that you only get things in life by working hard. However, friendship is one area where too much struggle can actually put you back further from your goal. But being patient and letting time do the work for you, that's a superpower anyone can use. And now it's time for another frequently asked Ant-Man question. Here's a few more quick hits. Question number 1. Someone wants to know, will you marry me? Answer they gave. What a sweet note. I'm so flattered, but I'm also still definitely with hope. However, I will print this out the next time we have a fight and she makes me sleep on the ant couch. Question. When are you going to grow up, stop running around in a costume with your little friends, playing cops and robbers and looking for Martians, and go back to a real job? What was wrong with a nice computer place? You were always good with computers. Hi, Mom. Jeez. All right. Chapter 16. From Ant to Man. Ants are awesome. Probably not the most unexpected sentence to hear from a guy named Ant-Man, but it's true. They are 6 legs down, the best coworkers I've ever had, and unlike other teammates I've had with ants, there's never any drama. Now, I admit I don't have the kind of head-over-heels affection for ants that Hank Pym does. Part of me truly believes that if given the zoning permit to do so, he would bulldoze his house and replace it with a giant hill. But still, I have an awful lot of respect and admiration for the little fellas, or depending on my specific mission, just plain fellas. And I wanted to sing a few of their praises because in many ways, the Formicidae have helped me become a better Homo sapiens. Jesus. He's using the scientific Formicidae and Homo sapiens. First of all, ants are the ultimate team players. They're not the only creatures with a strong social nature, but they're up there. You've heard of ant colonies? Well, one species has reportedly formed a colony that's got more than 300 million ants, ranged up and down the coast of Europe, which, to be honest, makes it sound pretty luxurious to be an ant. And just imagine how hard it must be to reach common agreements among 300 million of your fellow anythings. The Avengers and Co. would sometimes practically break out into a second civil war over whether to order lunch from the usual Italian place or the usual Thai place. Now, what I find most impressive is what that team-centric attitude translates into. The willingness that ants have to take on any number of crazy and grinding jobs. Every colony has a queen, mating ants, and worker ants. The worker ants are stuck with all the drudgery, feeding the larvae, taking out the trash, foraging for food, defending the colony, and even policing conflict within it. Pretty sure if there were ant pants to wash, they'd have to do that too. Little surprised that the workers doing those thankless yet essential tasks are, just as all too often with our species, the females. But it gets even more peculiar and more thankless. Some species have what's called a soldier ant, which is not at all the little cap ant it sounds like. Rather, when their hill or habitat is under attack, the soldier ant's job is to block off the entry hole with their heads. Finally, a job where my natural hard-headedness would be an asset. There's also a class called scout ants, which neither escort old lady ants across the stream nor sell extremely tiny mint-flavored chocolate cookies. Their job is to find sources of food and leave scent trails for everyone else to follow. And the specific ants I've had the honor of working with have had to go way beyond what even their complex brains could have imagined. For example, the fire ants build elaborate and fully functioning bridges, ladders, and rafts. The one we call crazy ants were our electrical engineers, by which I mean they could conduct electricity with their bodies and fry out enemy electronics. The carpenter ants proved provided my winged transport to wherever I needed. My dearly departed carpenter pal Anthony helped me infiltrate not one, but two high security installations, and even outflew Falcon in battle. Do I even need to elaborate on the ant who agreed to get large, slip on my house arrest ankle monitor, and pretend to be me to throw off the feds during my house arrest? That is one dude who likes to live on the edge. The point is, no matter what size I'm currently operating at, ants inspire me to say yes to any task that comes my way. I've mentioned this tendency of mine before, but ants are one of the main reasons behind it. Whenever I have a flash of doubt or fear, I tell myself, if a creature who's in danger of being annihilated by a flip-flop can risk it all, so can you. More broadly, they remind me that I'm not just doing it for me. Somehow, it's both humbling and empowering to realize that every action I take can have a mission-critical, even life-or-death impact on the series of tasks that countless of my fellow heroes are undertaking at the same time. I don't have to tell you what level of ant guts it took for my little colleagues to jam up the gun of sociopath Darren Cross, or risk self-electrocution by frying PIM Technologies security servers. But I know that all our efforts to stop the Yellow Jacket suit from decimating the world would have been sunk without each of those literally tiny tasks. Also, when I remember that there's a whole colony of others depending on me to do my job, it just makes that job easier. You might even say more instinctual. Another cool way ants do better than just about anyone is communication. Now, I'm not talking about Hank's ant communication device, which uses electromagnetic waves to stimulate the ant's olfactory nerves. But that brings up something critical I wanted to highlight. Ants don't have ears. Some species don't even have eyes. Instead, they navigate their environment, including how they interact with others, through highly advanced senses of feel and smell. They are extremely sensitive at reading vibrations on the ground through a special organ located under their knees. Can you imagine? Wow, Doris, get a load of this. You will not believe your kneecaps. I wanted to go back because he's talking about the ants. They pack a lot of wisdom into those teeny tiny little bodies. And as for smell, they mostly communicate by essentially hurling little specialized hormonal packets through the air at each other. Unlike how I attempted to communicate with girls back in high school by using way too much cologne, unsuccessfully. You know what's even cooler about those two senses, though? They're not just wild ways of reading the world beyond our familiar old workhorses, the eyes and ears. They're completely different ways of being in the world and being with others. Ways that I've tried to apply to my own life. The first one, tactically, requires an extraordinary level of sensitivity. Ground vibrations are not exactly a glaringly obvious signal, even for a Californian like me whose toes can tell you the Richter of an aftershock. To be able to read a wide variety of them, you have to be able to be really attuned to your environment, more outside of your head, as it were. And smell is also intriguing in a different way. In humans and ants alike, it has a strong connection to memory. Now, I can't speak to how extensive ant memories are, but I know that being really adept at olfactory communication means that you're not just thinking in the moment. You're also, in a way, thinking about the past. Unconsciously or not, it's a richer way to take in the world. So I think being among the ants so much has heightened my facilities for sensitivity and memory. I know this because I've faced some serious communication challenges, and learning to become more sensitive to both present and past have helped me through. Figuring things out with my ex-wife Maggie after I got out of prison was a steep uphill climb, but once I was working with creatures who deal with hills for a living, I worked at it a little harder. I tried to sensitize myself to hear things she wasn't outright saying but was signaling to me, and I learned how to bridge our present-day differences by connecting more deeply to our shared memories. Likewise, with her new man Paxton, I had to invent a whole new way of connecting if I was ever going to be a part of Cassie's life. Here, too, I worked harder to attune myself to the frequencies he vibed at. Long story short, there's a reason that P and I have our best conversations when shooting down video game zombies together. Sorry, Hope! And obviously, we didn't have memories together, but once I made an effort to sniff out the Scott Lang he was used to thinking about in a nutshell, a criminal, I could consciously become the opposite of that. As for Cassie, I've worked at both my sensitivity to her vibrations and drawn on our past together, and I can confidently report that I still need help. Hank, if you're reading this, can you work on a young adult communication device? Finally, what I dig so much about ants is their strength. Now, this is the fun fact people usually get to first with ants. Depending on who you ask, ants can lift anywhere from 50 to 5,000 times their body weight. And yes, the Ant-Man suit replicates some of that at both ends of the scale, which is absolutely indispensable for battle and breaking into things. I'm still impressed at how Hank found a way for someone to be ant-sized but retain the proportional strength to punch like a human. Likewise, when I'm big, the suit gives me disproportionately greater strength than a guy that size. I've still got the outstanding airport repair bills to prove it. However, even these totally badass mecha add-ons can take a very heavy toll on the suit wearer's own personal reserve of strength. When I enter giant mode, I'm the opposite of Captain America. I can do that for, well, not all day. Which is why, ultimately, while the amplified force I can wield when antified comes from the suit, it's not what keeps me going. Instead, I get the strength to keep fighting by drawing on the more important ant qualities I've been talking about. The feelings of being part of a team and knowing others are depending on me give me a burst of purpose that powers me through. And along the same lines, those heightened senses of being more attuned to others, in all their complexity and dimensions, makes the battle more real for me. Because I know, and not only know, I feel and remember who exactly it is I'm battling for. So thanks, little guys, for looking out for this big one. We could all stand to learn a thing or two from how you work together and care for each other. And also, thanks for taking me in and letting a big clumsy primate crash the already very successful ant party you've got going on with us. Okay. Another frequently asked Ant-Man question. What was the quantum realm like? Wow, where do I begin? No, literally, it's pretty hard knowing where anything begins or ends there. Imagine a place of just no rules. Up is down, things just kind of float in the air. Shapes and colors you've never seen in nature commingle. Objects that seem alive are part of the landscape, while others that look like geological features move. I'm not a person who ingests substances, but it's enough to make you think you have. But to be fair, I only spent what felt like 5 hours there, most of them focused all my attention on trying to escape and screaming, "Hope!" If you want a more thorough answer, I'd ask Janet Van Dyne. But be warned, she sort of refused to talk about it for some reason. Maybe because after spending 30 years there, she's like, been there, done whatever that was. Chapter 17. Sunday in the Lab with Hank. If you followed my story at all, and by the way, the beginning of this book would be a great place to start, you'll know that most of my size-shifting adventures begin with a scientist named Hank Pym. He's a man whose mind is always seeking what's beyond the horizon, and I can't wait to see where it's likely to lead us next. So I thought I'd have a little chat with Hank. Even though he's retired from his company, Hank Pym's mind cannot and will never retire. He stays out of Hope's way while she runs Pym Van Dyne Industries, but he's also set up his own private lab, and he still has many opinions about science, his discoveries, and the future. Unfortunately for me, not for the world, Hank is also just as much of a workaholic as ever. When I asked for 15 minutes of his time, his first reply was, "That's 15 minutes away from the lab." Fortunately, I hashed out a compromise. Hank would let me briefly interview him while he was at work in the lab, as long as I did not get too specific about what he's working on. That last part required some paperwork. It's not usual practice to make the guy dating your daughter sign an NDA so big it looks like it's been enlarged with Pym particles, but then again, by now, I'm pretty used to the unusual. Until now, Pym particles have primarily been used to change the size of regular-sized things. Me and you, a toy tank, an ant with dreams of being a rock drummer. But why not also use them to make really little things big? Things you can only see under a microscope, amoebas, germs, viruses, so we can see them much better and study them. He reminded me that many germs and viruses are potentially lethal. No need, Hank. That stomach bug left me rattled enough to remember that. But he was making the point that making small things into bigger, dangerous things can be dangerous. Of course, a virus enlarged to the size of a grapefruit could be extremely valuable to virologists, Hank said. But what if increasing its size also increases its ability to cause damage? What if it slips out of our control and decides to attack us? Yikes, for someone who's gotten attacked by as many unexpected dangerous things as the original Ant-Man, Hank Pym has that. Yikes, for someone who's gotten attacked by as many unexpected dangerous things as the original Ant-Man Hank Pym has, that was no minor concern. Here's a picture. Here's a shot of Hope that Hope took of Hank's introducing me to the enlarging and shrinking discs he invented. It's all in the wrist. So what about tiny particles that aren't dangerous? I tried. The building block stuff all life is made of atoms, electrons, the quark's the limit. Possibly safer, Hank admitted, but he also pointed out something Janet Van Dyne, aka the former WASP, Hank's wife, and Hope's mom, and I have learned from tough personal experience. The quantum realm, where all those little building blocks live, can be wildly unpredictable. We'd barely gotten Janet out of there alive. We were not exactly prepared for an immediate return trip to that subatomic jungle. In the meantime, all that tiny thinking had brought me to nanotech. Obviously, Pim Van Dyne isn't the only lab experimenting with this groundbreaking, fascinating, and really hard to see new field, but I had a different notion of what PVD could accomplish than anyone else could. What do you think of nanotools? I ventured. Say you build a piece of equipment designed for a highly specific purpose at a normal scale, then reduce it to fit inside an artery or a capillary or even a cell. Reader, I hope you're sitting down for what I'm about to relate next. Hank actually liked my idea. Well, to be precise, he didn't hate it. His specific words were, at least when we modify something that we ourselves built, we get to control the variables. Trust me, for Hank Pym, that's practically gushing. Emboldened by this opening, I decided to go straight for the most out there idea I thought of. You know how a lot of people are working from home these days? What if we could use Pym particles to better accommodate those workers by miniaturizing the whole office or even the whole office building? You could have it travel around a key employee's home, shrinking and spanning as needed. Imagine what kinds of startup businesses get off the ground if they didn't have to invest in pricey, centrally located real estate. Hank could have said a lot of things in response to that. Instead, as usual, choosing a few words as he could to get me off his back and back to work, he opted for these. Remember what happened when I tried that with my lab? Indeed, I still had the asphalt burns from sprinting around San Francisco to remind me. Then Hank admitted it actually wasn't the worst idea he'd been pitched. It just wasn't an idea for now. That was actually the perfect segue to my next question, which I happen to think of as extremely now, and I know this is one of Hope's priorities as the head of Pim Van Dyne Industries. The environment. I asked Hank about the possibility of using Pym particle technology to reduce the actual physical size of toxins in our air and water. He replied, interesting again with the gushing, Hank. Then he explained the complication. In the real world, when you target something with a reducer, you have to shrink the whole something. So if you want to say reduce the pollution in a cubic meter of water, what you end up doing is reducing that entire mass. All the molecules, even the good ones, just get shrunk into a little ice cube. But what about designing that reducer more precisely to avoid the good molecules? For Hank, this notion was on the table, but it took us back to the issue from earlier, the unpredictability of working in the subatomic space. In other words, this was the kind of thing Pim Van Dyne certainly wanted to crack, but we were still too much in unintended consequences land to broach it yet. Fair enough. I tried another track, asked him about attacking the ecological problem that does have a consistent physical presence at human scale. For instance, we know as the planet gets hotter, our deserts are growing at an alarming pace. Could we use Pym particles to shrink those deserts down? Hank shot back. Think about what you're doing when you apply reduction to a desert. You're not just shrinking down sand dunes. You're shrinking an entire rich and vibrant ecosystem. Do we really want to do that to a whole stratum of plants, animals, and insects? He had a point. And I'm pretty sure some of my ant pals aren't really eager to go any smaller. But Hank wasn't done, and even if it's, let's say you could isolate a patch of desert where not too much flora and fauna would be affected, and you did make it smaller, according to some of our preliminary findings in terrestrial topology, that reduction might pull in the land around it. Wow, I said, I never even having considered this before. Pretty sure our planet is not ready for global shrinking. In the uncomfortable but all too familiar silence that followed my joke attempt, I thought of my final question. How does Pim Van Dyne Industries decide where to focus its resources? When you're choosing experiments, how do you separate what we humans actually need versus what we just can do? Here, Hank did the unthinkable and actually stopped his work. Briefly. As with his technology, he wanted to make sure to get this right. Finally, he spoke. And as before, he said something that seemed shocking, but in fact made perfect sense. Hank remarked that even when we could work on practically anything, ultimately people might not really want many more options on resizing things. We humans tend to like our things predictable, familiar, and of course we've spent tens of millions of years evolving to be best suited to this exact size and scale. Look, here's the bottom line, Hank concluded. Before we blow things wide open and start planning what sizes everything in creation could be, maybe we need a better grasp on our own limitations as a species. Wow, chills. That is so Hank Pym. At this point, I really did want nothing more than to give the guy his work time back, especially now that I'd just gained even more appreciation for his thoughtfulness. By way of wrapping up, I tried to express that. I praised Hank for recognizing how Pym particles can be used for ill, even walking away from a lucrative career over it, and how that conscientiousness has always stuck with me, and in all the situations he's put me into. And then, only then, did Hank Pym drop his ultimate bombshell. Actually, son, seems like you've picked up on it pretty well too. Other than Janet or Hope, there's no one I'd trust more with my tech. Then Hank gave his trademark nano-sized grin and gently pushed me outside the lab so he could close the door, as I stood there, still reeling from that totally speechless. In other words, once again, Hank Pym had me exactly where he wanted me. Now time for another frequently asked Ant-Man question. Would you be willing to auction off a date with you for our charity? Yeah, for how would you like to do that for FMF&AID Global Association? Remember, we're raising money for FMF&AID Global Association starting this Saturday. It's February 1st, all the way through March 6th. And don't forget about our streamathon, February 27th through March 2nd, and possibly beyond, depending on how much money we raise. And all the money goes directly to FMF&AID Global Association, which helps people like me who have familial Mediterranean fever and other autoinflammatory diseases. And now back to our book. How flattering. I do like to help out whenever I can for a good cause. I'd love to. However, just some fair warning, beyond the fact that I'm still with Hope, I am a lousy on a date. I've never been truly comfortable on a date with a woman, and it certainly didn't help to have all those years of enforced celibacy. But enough about college. And beyond that, when you work in the hero trade, you become super attuned to even the slightest hint of possible danger, which could pretty much hijack any date. Let's say we're having a nice chat about our respective travails at work and what we're both binge watching these days, and then someone in the vicinity starts trying some bad stuff. Goodbye, shared plate of cannoli, and hello, neighborhood trattoria getting turned into a smoke-filled battleground. It's why I mostly get takeout. So, you know what? We might finish this evening, actually. Let's find out. Yeah, I think we actually might. So cool. A letter to my daughter that for some reason you people are also reading. My dearest Cassie, aka Peanut. Hi, it's your dad. Well, you know, your bio dad. Not Paxton, who I have to admit is doing a hell of a job being there for you when I'm not around. This is getting really awkward. And maybe that's because we've been robbed of so much time together. So much time, basically half your life. Which makes me want to rush in and say all the things I couldn't say to you when I was in prison, and then trapped in the quantum realm for all those years. Aw, and there's a picture of little Cassie right there, and the caption says, Cassie, I know you're going to hate that I put all these kids' photos of you in my book, but I can't help but still think of you this way. But instead, I'm going to try to just focus on the important stuff. Some advice on how to make the most of your life. I know. Why should you? Why should anyone take life advice from a guy who's been arrested multiple times and spent 3 years in prison? So right off the bat, that's my first piece of advice. Don't do that. But also, say what you will about some of my choices. You can't deny that I'm a person who's lived. So the least I can do is turn all that unnecessary crazy-making stuff I've gone through into something useful for you. In my relatively short life, I've seen so much creation and destruction that ironically, I've actually gotten a pretty good handle on the things that stick around long enough to matter. So here's my take on what truly endures in this world and this life. Number 1, time matters. I know what you're thinking. Oh, look, here's my dad of all people telling me you can't change a timeline. But look, outside of the context of an epic adventure to save the universe, this is not really an option. And not only because the Pims would be mad at either of us for using up any more of those particles, but also because, as we Avengers learn, time heists can be extremely messy. Which, in a strange way, actually kind of makes my point for me. Don't mess around with time. We ordinary mortals are given a finite amount of it, and we can't either waste it or maximize, and we can either waste it or maximize every second of it. I say maximize. I know this probably sounds cliche to you, or even worse, irrelevant, and I get it. You're young and you're feeling immortal. And to use another cliche that everyone's undoubtedly throwing at you all the time, you have your whole life ahead of you. But that's the tricky part. Pretty soon you're going to find out that you actually may not have all that life to yourself. Jobs will gobble up your precious time, people will need you, circumstances will constrain you, enemies, personal, institutional, and biological, may arise out of nowhere to suck whatever time dregs are left. I still can't believe which decade of life I'm already in. So right now, while you still have some nominal say in where your life goes from here, fight for every scrap of it. Also, to take on one more cliche, last one I promise, you know the one that goes, there's no time like the present. Lies. Take it from someone who's literally experimented with timelines. There is no time but the present. Everything you want to do, everything you want to be, and everyone you want to be with, chase all that down today. Don't wait, because trust me, none of it will wait for you. About now you might be thinking, but Dad, you went away, and I did wait, and then you came back twice. Yes, of course that's true, but I also don't think I need to remind you of all the things you and I missed out on, sharing during those times, which we definitely are not getting back. Walking you to your first day of big girl school, your Unicorns versus Dragons fourth birthday party, your debut on stage as tap dancing tree number 3. If you think I would have been a blubbering mess at any of those moments, spoiler alert, I would have. Just imagine how wrecked I was having to imagine them while sitting on a hard cot in my cold, lonely cell. I don't want to alarm you, but it was prison. My life was in danger, and yet the only life I was thinking of during those moments was yours, going on without me in it. And you must remember those nights when I'd just gotten back from the quantum realm, looking through the photo album together, poring over the endless smiling faces of people who suddenly got yanked out of our lives. And in the worst possible reversal of how things are supposed to go between parents and kids, you were the one wiping my tears and telling me, it's okay. It's okay. Now that I look back on such moments, I wasn't just in mourning for people we'd lost, I was also in mourning all the time you and I had lost. No amount of Pym particles or infinity stones could turn those lost memories for me into shared memories for us. What I do know is that there will be more memories that you will make to share with others, but only if you take action today and make them happen. So bottom line, seize the tap dancing battle unicorn Cassie. I know. Number 2, size matters. I know, easy for you to say, Mr. I can literally change my size at will, but again, I want to turn my weird life journey into your advantage. First, being big gives a person a whole different perspective on life. They start to see all those massive streets, buildings, and cities that we humans create and get so intimidated by as nothing but toy structures, temporary obstacles on their ultimate path. And also, from that perspective, people start to look like, well, ants, which can be a remarkably liberating feeling. We spend so much of our time operating in fear of other people, of their judgments, their regard, their powerful emotions, but at the end of the day, they really don't have the power to make or break us, no matter how they may act when we're all the same size. What I learned from being Giant Dad is that the only people who should be huge in your life are those whom you choose to have in your life. I know you felt how big the gap was when your friends and loved ones got blipped away for 5 years. So now that they're back, make sure they know how much they fill those gaps in for you, like every day. Meanwhile, from the other side of the scale, I can also tell you what being small has taught me. And it's basically that, in a nutshell, the little things really add up. In ant world, a crumb of focaccia could be the key to a week's survival. Likewise, in human world, a kind word or a cruel one can transform someone's entire day. Seeing the world at tiny scale makes a person truly appreciate all the tiny things, the things we too often overlook. It makes me mindful of the infinitude of miracles holding everything we care about together. It's enough to make me truly grateful. And trust me, gratitude can give you more strength and energy than any power source in the galaxy. So don't lose sight of all the small stuff because that's the true reality of the world. But also, contradiction alert. Number 3, size doesn't matter. What do I mean by this? What I mean is, never let yourself get defined by anyone else's notions of how big or small you are in their eyes. You alone decide your size, with or without a fancy red size changing button. And that also means you, and nobody else, are in charge of deciding when to make yourself big or small in any given situation. Be big when speaking up against an unfair boss, a disrespectful partner, and an unjust government or corporation. I've already seen you doing some of this, and I couldn't be prouder. But be careful. The last thing we need is 2 Lang spending time behind bars. And also, be small, enough to admit fault, as well as what you don't know and need to learn. From what I've seen of the young woman you're becoming, I know I don't need to drill you in martial arts like Hope's dad did for her. You already know how to fight. You've been doing it your whole life. But if nothing else I've put down here has made it through, I just want to convey one idea to you. You already have the power to become the size you want. And that's what, my darling peanut, of whatever size you want to be. I want most in this world to leave you big and also small. Love, Dad. Chapter 17. Sizing it all up. I've had a weird life, and I wouldn't trade away a second of it. Well, okay, maybe the 3 years of it when I was in prison, but then I wouldn't have met Lewis or come to Hank Pym's attention and Hope's. Okay, then, maybe those 5 years of the world I missed when I was spending what seemed like 5 hours in the quantum realm, but then again, without those 5-year hours, I wouldn't have come up with the idea that I got everyone back from the blip and helped beat Thanos. So in my usual Scott Lang roundabout way, this is kind of my point. You never really know which moments of your life will turn out to be the ones that mean the most, so you might as well embrace all of them. Because if you think about it, we all experience the passage of time in our own lives. Or at least we feel like we do. How it seems to rush by too fast when we're having fun or watching our kids grow, or drag on too slowly when we're getting our teeth cleaned or hearing our office mate tell us about his crazy dream last night. What I mean is, we're all capable of traveling across the vast range of time in our lives using only our minds. As far as I know, we're the only species that can do this in a sustained and meaningful way. Even my awesome ant buddies are really only capable of present tense oriented thinking, which makes sense considering their collective mentality. But the point is, we humans, all humans, have been given this very unique power to mentally liberate ourselves from our present moment. So what do we do with that? Well, that's the cool part. We're all ultimately the authors of our own story. Of course, I don't mean we get to determine our own outcome, but we do get to decide something ultimately even more precious. What every beat of our story means. Ultimately, that was my purpose in writing this book. I mean, besides my buddies asking me to. As I've dug back into all the things that had happened to me, I've come to believe that every moment of it has been for a reason. How can I be so sure? Because I have it within me, just as you do, to give it a reason. By using it to inform the many moments to come. You might say we all have an origin story, and that story is always still being told. In these pages, I've tried to tell my story, but not just the marquee bits that'll end up in my obit when I head for that big anthill in the sky. I've attempted to figure out how not just those moments, but also especially the ordinary moments surrounding them shaped who I am today. And you can do the same. Now, just to be clear, having our lives mean something isn't the same as having it all make sense. Because if I think about it, my life doesn't really make sense. I used to ask myself a lot of questions about that. Scott, you're a divorced ex-con. How are you an Avenger? Why are you time traveling with Captain America? That doesn't make sense. Well, they're right. It doesn't make sense. Because what I've learned is it's not up to the other people or forces to make sense for us. We have to make it ourselves. A lot has changed about my life, but everywhere I go, people ask me the same thing. Scott, what about now? What's next? Where does the ride take you? And here's a nice photo of him in the Ant-Man suit. Hank took this photo as a record of my early training. He thankfully did not feel the need to document all the times my training involved me throwing up. So again, we'll go back. Scott, what about now? What's next? Where does the ride take you? Who knows? If I knew that, it wouldn't be a ride. But the one thing I do know is wherever the ride takes you, you will not be riding alone. It's been a crazy few years for everyone. So let's make time for the stuff that really matters, like friends. Friends you didn't even know you had. Remember the people who got you here. You couldn't have done it without them. Trust me on this. No one you've ever crossed paths with is too little to be worth a moment of your time, and in some cases, appreciation. I should know. I'm just a guy who got fired from Baskin Robbins. But thanks to someone else, nowadays I'm also something besides that. I'm a little guy who is taken notice of. Even if it was just to use my criminal skills. Hank's recognition of what I, an ex-con divorcee, absentee dad, failed ice cream scooper, was still capable of contributing to the world has made all the difference. As has the woman he happens to be the father of. What can I say? Sometimes you just get lucky. I'm lucky I met Hope Van Dyne. I think you know who she is by now. She's taken back her dad's company. Now she's using the PIM particle for global change. A lot of people say they want to save the world, but Hope, she saves it every day. Reforestation, affordable housing, food production, she's not wasting a second. I still can't believe it. None of this should have happened, but it did. One thing I admire most about Hope and her work is how she's not sitting back, wondering how bad things could have gone differently. She's taking charge and making change. Hope is racing ahead to fix future things now. She's moved on in a way that I'm still struggling to do. And don't get me wrong, it's not that I'm trapped in negativity. Sure, our planet will continue to face threats and problems, but on the whole, it's a pretty good world. I'm glad we saved it. So that brings me to now, as in, what do I do with it? Great question. I'll let you know as soon as I know the answer. Do I miss the action? Sometimes. Will I be there when the Avengers need me? Absolutely. I'd never turn my back on them. But right now, the only job I want is being a dad. Which brings me to the person this book is really aimed at, or at least the person whom I just wanted to say something to. I love you, Cassie. Thank you for being my hero. And I'm sorry I miss some birthdays. And for the rest of you kids out there, a word of advice. Look out for the little guy. Make mistakes. Take chances. Because if there's one thing life's taught me, there's always room to grow. And now we finish with the acknowledgements. And look, it's Cassie hugging him. Aww. So here we go. Let's finish it up, folks. I can't believe we've actually finished it. If you read the whole book that came before these acknowledgements, you probably know the first people I want to thank. Cassie, Hope, Hank, Janet, Lewis, Maggie, and Paxton. You're the best reasons I've ever had to come back from the quantum realm. Also, I'm going to go ahead and thank the Avengers. You know who you are, for saving the world and for asking me to write this book. Not necessarily in that order. There are also some people you didn't read about in this book, but who were very important in helping a certain guy who never ever thought he'd write a book to somehow actually write a book. First and most important is Rob Kuttner, who is with me every step of the way as my writing coach, cheerleader, late-night texter, transcriber, and even occasional crying partner. We must never ever discuss with anyone else the secret confessions we shared with each other that night, Rob. Remember, my ant minions are always watching you. This book would literally not have been written without Rob. It's because I think Rob is the one who wrote it. There were a bunch of key people on the Avengers side of things who made sure I didn't spell Thanos with two N's. I only ever heard it spoken aloud, and also got all my other facts right. If I didn't, that is definitely on me, not them. They are Christy Amarncool, Natalie Arton, Andrew Barron Varshan, Sarah Truly Beers, Stephen Broussard, Capri Ciola, Adam Davis, Andrea Lon, Sven Larson, Kelly Lee, Molly Jones, Rachel Page, Julia Palakal, Ron Richards, Jacqueline Ryan Rudolph, Sarah Singer, Jenny Spring and Matt Wilkie. I've learned that behind every super team there is there's another just as super team. At my publisher, Hyperion Avenue, a group of superpowered wordsmiths, designers, copy editors, proofreaders, and bookmakers gathered all these letters and lines and dots together and got them printed on bound together sheets of paper, and also let the world know about it. I'm looking at you, Tanya Agurto, Dana Bremer, Catalina Castro, Guy Cunningham, Monique Demon Riley, Lisa M. Geller, Deneen Goodwin, Kurt Hartman, Suyun Kim, Amy King, Vicky Corlishin, Katie Leary, Anthony J. Lee, Jennifer Levesque, Sarah Liebling, John Morgan, Scott Peel, Carol Roeder, Alexander Serrano, Fanny Sheffield, Michael Siglain, Stephanie Sumalong, Gregum Vardinan, Lynn Wagner, Beth Wasco, and Tanika A. Woods. And I'm sure there are many others I'm forgetting or who were better than the people listed here at avoiding having to deal with directly with me. Finally, I want to acknowledge you, the person who read this book, or at least these acknowledgements, or at least this sentence. I still can't believe all these amazing things happened to me, and my goal in writing this book, with a lot of help from Rob, was to give you a sense of what it would feel like if they happened to you, and what you'd learn from them. I'd never thought I'd get a chance to communicate with another person that way, and I'm only able to because you picked up a book with me on the cover and decided to give it a read. So thank you, little guy. I'm looking out for you. Marvel Studios' Ant-Man, Captain America, Civil War, Ant-Man and the Wasp, and Avengers Endgames are all available now in digital and physical formats wherever movies are sold, and are also streaming on Disney+. Yeah, see a little thing at the end. Well, that was fantastic, folks. I thank you for joining me on this voyage of 5 streams to read Look Out for the Little Guy by Rob something. It's by Rob Kuttner, but pretended to be written by Scott Lang and Ant-Man. But of course it was really written by the real Ant-Man. Of course, guys, we all know Ant-Man. So that was fantastic. But now what we're going to do is we're going to flip a coin. You're going to flip a coin, and I'm going to grab one here. We're just going to use good old first coin I grab. And it's going to be between 2 books. We've got 2 books that are possibly going to be read next. The first one is From a Certain Point of View, Star Wars. It was a book released for the 40th anniversary of A New Hope, and it's a bunch of short stories told from the perspective of other characters who were in scenes so we'll see like common scenes from A New Hope, but from a different perspective. The other book is the first book in a series called the Hichi Saga, and it's called Getaway, and it seems like a very interesting saga. It's on a lot of top lists. It was written in 1977. So we're going to do heads will be Star Wars, and tails will be the Getaway. And I'm going to flip it. I'm going to have it land on the desk, and I'm not going to catch it. And it is tails, so it is going to be the Getaway. So I will be ordering that this weekend and this week, and it will be the Getaway. So thank you all, and have a good evening and good night. Get all tucked in and enjoy your hot beverage, and we'll catch you tomorrow for another episode of the main course. And good night, everybody. Hope you enjoyed this bedtime story. Get ready for the next book, The Getaway. Written by Frederick Pohl. I'm going to read the quick. Seated among the stars are troves of valuable artifacts left behind by the enigmatic, long-vanished alien race called the Hichi. For the right price, anyone can climb aboard one of the abandoned Hichi spaceships, cast off on an autopilot voyage to parts unknown, and take a chance on finding wealth or facing death. So that's just the series. I'm not going to read the tagline for the book itself because that's just for the whole Hichi saga. So very excited for that, and have a good night, everybody.